and welcome to episode 3 of Cloud Tech 10 for the 27th of March 2017. I'm Mark and I'm going to tell you all the latest news about Microsoft Azure from the past week in 10 minutes or less. The ability to have multiple IP addresses per network interface card on Azure virtual machines is now generally available. This feature is useful in a number of scenarios, such as hosting multiple websites or services with different IP addresses on a single server, or for deploying network virtual appliances, such as firewalls or load balancers. It's now also possible to assign any of the private IP addresses for any network interface to an Azure load balancer's backend pool. You can assign up to 250 private IP addresses to each NIC. The number of public IP addresses you can define is subject to limitations within individual Azure subscriptions. The default values are currently 60 dynamic public IP addresses or 20 static public IP addresses. If you wanted to assign more than that, you'd need to raise a support request. Here's how to create a virtual machine with multiple IP addresses using the Azure CLI. We start with a resource group, and we create a static public IP address. Then a virtual network with a single subnet. Now a network interface to which we assign the public IP address, virtual network and subnet we just created. Let's now create a second public IP address and assign it to the same network interface card. And finally, a third IP address, this time a dynamic private IP address. Now we'll create a virtual machine and configure it to use the network interface that we've just assigned the 3 IP addresses to. Once that's created, let's look at the Azure portal, and for this virtual machine, if we check the network interface and the IP configurations assigned to it, we can see that it has 3 IP configurations, 2 of which have public IP addresses, 1 of which has an internal IP address only. Version 2.5 of the SDK for Azure Service Fabric is available now, along with version 5.5 of the Azure Service Fabric runtime and standalone Windows Server package. This release features support for compressed application packages, which helps improve the time taken to upload packages to a cluster, especially on slower or higher latency connections, and changes to health checks which improve resilience around upgrades. Integration with ASP.NET Core is now fully supported in both stateless and stateful reliable services, and includes new Service Fabric middleware that helps with service resolution. And Service Fabric.NET Core in Visual Studio 2017 now supports the new CS project file format. Azure Resource Manager Templates are a great way to manage the deployment and updating of Azure resources for an application or service you're running in Azure. The Azure Quick Start templates provide some brilliant examples that can help you get started by finding something similar to what you need to do and then modifying it as required. Now, there's another excellent resource to help you when working with Azure Resource Manager Templates. The documentation has just received a major update that now includes reference content with JSON syntax and property values. Visual Studio Code is a really good tool to use when building Resource Manager templates and has some great integration, including the Azure Resource Manager tools and Azure tools for Visual Studio Code extensions. With experience, you can build up a template pretty quickly, but if you're getting started, then the updated documentation is extremely helpful. For instance, if I want to create a virtual machine, I can go to Compute, then Virtual Machines, and here's a predefined template for creating a virtual machine. Let's paste that into Visual Studio Code. You can see that it's already populated with the required sections for creating a virtual machine and its dependencies. The documentation now contains information to help you understand what information you need to provide in each section, and there are links to further references which explain those sections in more detail. Azure SQL Data Warehouse is now available in 4 new regions: Germany Central, Germany Northeast, Korea Central, and Korea South. With the Web Apps on Linux service that's currently available in preview, it's possible to deploy web applications to Azure that rely on Linux. As well as a choice of runtime stacks including Node.js, .NET Core, Ruby and PHP, you can also choose Docker container images from either private or public sources. Leveraging the use of Docker containers, a WordPress installation for web apps on Linux is now available in the marketplace. It's as simple as naming your WordPress installation, creating a resource group, and selecting or creating a new Web Apps on Linux app service plan. Moments later, and the installation is ready to go. Here you can see that the deployment is using a publicly available Docker image. Click the URL for the web application and soon you'll see the famous 5-minute WordPress installation process. The installation includes WordPress, Apache Web Server, PHP, MariaDB, PHPMyAdmin, and Redis. And in less than 5 minutes, I'm up and running with my new WordPress blog. Azure Traffic Manager now features geographic routing. Previously, you could choose between priority, where traffic is directed to a list of prioritized endpoints to provide primary and backup services, weighted, where traffic is distributed across multiple endpoints using a weighting number to determine how much traffic is sent to each, and performance, where traffic is sent to the nearest endpoint calculated using network latency. Now with geographic routing, you can route user traffic to specific endpoints based on where the traffic has originated from. This can help provide a better user experience with customization and localization, or could help in situations where compliance with data sovereignty rules is a requirement. When you create an Azure Traffic Manager profile, select geographic at this point to make use of this new feature. Then add endpoints to configure configure which geographic locations will direct to which services. This feature works with Azure endpoints as well as external endpoints hosted outside of Azure. In this example, I configure an endpoint named Europe endpoint, which will target an app service I have running in the West Europe Azure region. I add Europe and Africa so that traffic from those locations will be directed to my app service in Europe. I continue adding endpoints so that traffic from Asia and Australia is sent to my app service in the Azure Southeast Asia region, an endpoint to direct traffic from the United States to my app service in the Azure West US region, and a final rule to direct all other traffic to an app service in Europe. A preview of Azure backup support for application consistent backups on Linux virtual machines is available now. An application consistent backup is one where the applications or services running on a virtual machine are quiesced before a backup of the server is taken. This is often the case with applications such as databases, where transactions may be stored in memory before being committed. Azure backup support for application consistent backups is provided on Linux virtual machines through the use of scripts that run before and after the backup is taken. A GitHub repository has been established where the community can contribute scripts for common scenarios. For example, the repository currently has a set of scripts that can be used to provide an application consistent backup for a server running MySQL. And staying with new preview services in Azure Backup, backup pre-checks have also been added. These checks run automatically as part of your scheduled backup jobs, looking for potential problems with virtual machines that could cause a backup to fail. Problems such as missing or incorrect versions of backup agents, or a network security group configured in such a way that it could prevent communications between the virtual machine and the Azure Backup service, are examples of issues that can be detected. To use this service, just open one of your existing recovery services vaults and you'll see the backup pre-checks tile. You can click the tile to reveal more information and drill down to specific virtual machines to get recommended or required steps to fix problems and prevent backup issues before they occur. A short while ago, a template to deploy virtual machines for an Ethereum blockchain environment was published on the Azure marketplace. In Ethereum blockchains, it's common to form a consortium of organizations with a shared interest in developing a blockchain solution. To help with this scenario, 2 additional templates have now been published in the marketplace, designed to accelerate the process of building out the infrastructure for a consortium Ethereum blockchain environment, potentially across multiple Azure regions, subscriptions, and Azure Active Directory tenants. The first consortium member deploys the leader template to establish the network. Then all subsequent members deploy the member template so that they can then join the consortium. The templates use VPN gateways to provide connectivity between consortium members. A detailed walkthrough document is provided to help you understand how the templates should be used. Azure Data Factory now allows loading data from SAP Hana and SAP Business Warehouse into Azure data stores such as Azure Blob, Azure Data Lake, or Azure SQL Data Warehouse to perform advanced analytics and reporting. The SAP Hana connector supports copying data from Hana information models such as analytic and calculation views, as well as row and column tables using SQL queries. The SAP Business Warehouse connector supports copying data from SAP Business Warehouse version 7 info cubes and query cubes. Getting started is simple. In Azure Data Factory, click Copy Data, then from the list of sources, find the SAP BW or SAP HANA connectors. Provide the details for your SAP connection. You'll then see the Server Explorer and Query Editor, and from there you can build queries. That's all for Cloud Tech 10 this week. Don't forget, tell your friends, like, share and subscribe, or follow me on Twitter. I'll see you next week. Cheers for watching. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter for more.